I don't know how I did it, but I was up until 5 o'clock in the morning yesterday researching Gnosticism and digging into this crazy cool concept about how there are apparently archons or demons like the ferrymen who, if you pass on and go over to the land of the dead, you will bump into these entities in the astral realm. Man, it reminded me so much of astral projection, and to know that Gnostic Christians back in the day believed in things like reincarnation, astral projection. It just blew my mind, and it had me wanting to learn the Coptic language, for crying out loud. And I found PDFs, Coptic, in 20 lessons. PDFs of Coptic language lectures. But anyways, let's get into the video and I'll show you what I spent my time until 5 in the morning looking at yesterday night. Have you ever heard of a Gnostic text that was dug up that's called the Book of Jeu, or the Books of Jeu? Not to be mistaken with the word Jew like J-E-W, but J-E-U. It happens to be interesting for two reasons. Firstly, this Gnostic Christian document is the only Gnostic Christian codex that was unearthed that has pictures with it, depictions and drawings. It's a very mystical text that has to do with what's called ascent mysticism, which basically is like saying, I'll put it in a kind of layman's way of saying it, old school OG Christians, hundreds of Christians back in the days, 2,000 years ago, believed that out-of-body experiences and things like astral projection was the pathway to get you through and to the different levels of heaven. And in Judaism, you might know that there was something like multiple heavens. 7 heavens. Anyways, the second reason that this book is really interesting, the Book of Jeu, there is in the Book of Jeu the answer about how to release yourself from reincarnation and defeat this archon or demon king ruler. And why I feel additionally that this is really interesting is that with this book holding the instructions on how to battle against this entity, what is otherwise known as the demiurge, the great ruler of this kingdom, of this material existence, why is it that only less than I can count on one hand an amount of scholars have decided to study this particular text and document? And then they put this book in the back office for nobody to ever look at again. I mean, literally less than I can count on one hand have scholars come and touched this book. It's a fascinating read, and I'm only like 70 pages into it. But I wanted to show you what else I learned about these old school OG Christians. Now, in the Book of Jeu, the discussion occurs from Jesus and his followers, where he is talking about how there is an invisible Father Spirit and an invisible Mother Spirit. Like I said, many people in different religions might have a lot more in common with the ancient Christians than the ones nowadays. These old school Christians in these certain sects of Christianity, they believed that the invisible spirit that was both male and female were controlling this alternative entity by means of emanations, which means you've got the primal God, the God at the top, and he splits off into a bunch of different other entities below him. These are different archetypes of the same God, kind of like the stories that you might hear in, if I'm not mistaken, Brahmanism or something to that effect. Again, I'm sure many of you have heard of those concepts. And in the Book of Jeu, one of the lower gods is called Jew, and us humans, we think he is called the true God, even though there's a God above him. And Jesus is explaining this to his followers. He describes that there is something called the treasuries. And in Gnosticism, it's kind of unclear what exactly the treasuries are, but it's been postulated that these are areas or realms where humans could access almost like eternal godly knowledge, either knowledge or actual realm locations. And in the Book of Jeu, what caught my eye when I was learning about these OG Christians who believed these kind of things is that these treasuries are guarded by 3 watchers. Now, if you've heard about the watchers, it may be because you have read into things like the Book of Enoch. And in this particular page here, the translations are followed by a reference number. That's why it says number 2, and it directs us to 1 AP Jas, verse 33. Took me about 50 minutes last night to figure out what that abbreviation was, because I thought maybe it was the Book of Jasher. Turns out it is the first apocalypse of James. And out of all of the different Gnostic books that take a good couple of years to sift through, the Apocalypse of James is one that I had never gone through. But it speaks about these 3 watchers. And I'm going to read it to you. It is fascinating. It is again Jesus speaking, but this time he's talking to his stepbrother, James. So let me give you the synopsis, if I can, of this particular first apocalypse of James. And I'm going to start off by saying, this is a story of Jesus coming to his stepbrother James after he was crucified, appearing to him, and it freaks James out. The entirety of this codex that was dug up in the Nag Hammadi library in northern Egypt back in 1945, when they got a hold of this Coptic text and you read through it, the stepbrother was just losing it. He was stressing. He was like bummed out. He was crying. He was weeping. He was trembling as Jesus was standing in front of him. But for 2 reasons. The Apocalypse of James discusses that Jesus has appeared to James, the stepbrother, and has told James, well, James, they crucified me and you're going to get martyred. So James is learning that his death is being predicted for him. And in history, James gets stoned to death. But that is not the only thing that Jesus tells him that day. Jesus says to James, oh, and by the way, after you die, you're going to face the 3 watchers. But these 3 watchers, he describes how to beat these 3 watchers. And I'm going to read these particular verses for you because they're quite fascinating. I'm going to start off in the section of the Apocalypse of James where James is concerned about the fact that Jesus just got crucified. He sees Jesus in front of him. He's like, holy shit, you're here. Not exactly verbatim, but he's like, didn't you suffer? Are you okay, Jesus? I was worried about you, pretty much. And Jesus says this. The Lord Jesus says, James, do not be concerned for me or for this people. I am he who was within me. Never have I suffered in any way, nor have I been distressed, and this people have done me no harm. And I'm going to put some commentary in on this. He's obviously saying, hey, I know that you're worried that I was crucified, but don't worry. It's all good. I wasn't stressed out. I was made for this, pretty much. And Jesus continues to say, and this people have done me no harm. But this people existed as a type of the archons, and it is deserved to be destroyed through them. Now, the next portion of the Apocalypse of James here, the translations get a little bit fragmented because these are really old documents, and sometimes in these codexes that were dug up, the pieces are missing. But if you don't know what an archon is, it's one of these emanations, one of these lower gods or watchers or fallen angels that got created, and now these are the principalities of the air, the wicked ones in high places that humanity battles against. Again, they're practically demons in the modern way that we understand demons, except for these things are called archons. And so Jesus is saying, these people have crucified me. They're being led by the archons anyways. And the archons, or these demons, these principalities, they need to be destroyed through all of these actions, through things like the crucifixions and all of that. And James was very timid, it says. I'm going to continue on reading. He was timid and he wept and he was very distressed. Because he says, you, James, have stirred up a great anger and wrath against yourself. And they both sat down upon a rock, and the Lord said to him, James, thus you will undergo these sufferings, but do not be sad, for the flesh is weak. It will receive what has been ordained for it, but as for you, do not be timid or afraid. The Lord ceased. Now when James heard these things, he wiped away the tears in his eyes, and very bitter. The Lord said to him, James, behold, I shall reveal to you your redemption. When you are seized and you undergo these sufferings, a multitude will arm themselves against you, that they may seize you. And in particular, 3 of them will seize you, they who sit there as toll collectors. Not only do they demand toll, but they also take away souls by theft. When you come into their power, one of them, who is their guard, will say to you, who are you, or where are you from? And you are to say to him, I am a son, and I am from the Father. He will say to you, what sort of son are you? And to what father do you belong? And you are to say to him, I am from the pre-existent Father, and a son in the pre-existent one. So basically, again, Jesus is getting the instructions. He's giving the instructions to James about what is called the 3 watchers, the 3 of them, who are known as the toll collectors. These are archons that he is going to be up against after he passes away, after he has been seized, okay? And the instruction is to not be afraid. Basically put, if you want to battle these entities in the out-of-body world, in this mystic ascent mysticism, the way to beat them is to remove fear. And Jesus himself was, to some degree, one of the OGs of the law of belief, where he always said, do not be afraid, hundreds of times, that the key was to have the faith and belief of a mustard seed even, and you could conquer even walking on water. So he tells James, if you want to battle these things, you don't have to fight them. You just have to use your speech, say these things, speak from the word, and not be afraid while you do it. Now, I did not know what the toll collectors were, but I found out that the theory of the toll collectors was very much like it resembled the understanding of the ferrymen that you would pay a toll to in different religious traditions, these entities who brought you across the land of the dead once you passed away. And as it stands, Not only is this idea of the toll collectors showing up in this and the Book of Jeu, these two ancient codices, but Bishop Ignatius and other fathers, like the more recent Father Seraphim Rose, were staunch arguers of, well, maybe I shouldn't say staunch arguers, but Father Rose was certainly arguing in favor of the toll collecting theory, but people like Bishop Ignatius from hundreds of years ago had it widely known that they believed in original Orthodox Christianity, you could say, that the toll collectors existed. These archons. It is modern Christians who don't believe these concepts. And if I'm not mistaken, these kind of traditions are also based in almost like Egyptian and Greco-Roman philosophy. In Egyptian traditions, you are also supposed to not be afraid when you are passing on to the next life. And your heart is supposed to be light as a feather, as they say. And then again, we have the stories coming out about the great ferryman. And I'm sure this is something that's also understood in certain indigenous communities as well. Now, Father Seraphim Rose was a Russian Orthodox hieromonk who died in the 80s, born in 1934, and he actually wrote some books on his understandings of these toll house watchers who are there to either allow you to pass if you pay the toll or steal your soul in order to throw you back down to what could very well be hell on earth again. And he certainly had his dabblings in a communistic way of looking at things. Again, he is at the time over in the Russian, the Russian world, the Orthodox Church world prior to the 80s. So he's got a different perspective of the way that he handled things. But at least when he spoke about things like the toll house and the guards and the watchers that were at this location, this realm that was essentially ruled by demons waiting for angels to escort you, he came up with those not just on his own, but again, because he was aware of Bishop Ignatius's stance on this. Now, I found a really nice article here, and this particular article gives the quotes of what the argument for the toll house theory was. These demon watchers who are like the ferrymen. Quoted from Bishop Ignatius, it says, "The space between heaven and earth, the whole azure expanse of the air, which is visible to us under the heavens, serves as the dwelling for the fallen angels who have been cast down from heaven. The holy apostle Paul calls the fallen angels the spirits of wickedness under the heavens, and their chief prince is the prince of the powers of the air. The fallen angels are dispersed in a multitude throughout the entire transparent immensity which we see above us, and they do not cease to disturb all human societies and every person separately. There is no evil deed, no crime of which they might not be instigators and participants. They incline and instruct men towards sin by all possible means." What he further on goes to say is, once he gets that out of his system, he says, "When the soul of a Christian leaves its earthly dwelling and begins to strive through the aerial spaces towards the homeland on high, the demons will stop it, strive to find it in a kinship with themselves, their sinfulness and their fall, and to drag it down to hell, prepared for the devil and his angels. They act thus by the right which they have acquired." Bishop Ignatius goes on further to say, "For the testing of souls as they pass through the spaces of the air, there have been established by the dark powers separate judgment places and guards in a remarkable order, in the layers of the under heaven, from earth to heaven itself, in the midst. stand guarding legions of falling spirits. Each division is in charge of a special form of sin and tests the soul in it when the soul reaches this division. The aerial demonic guards and the judgment places are called in the patristic writing the toll houses, and the spirits who serve them are called the tax collectors. These demons or archons who are waiting to test people when they die, that in the apocryphal apocalypse of James, Jesus just warned him, hey, you're going to see these guys and you need to battle through with them. Do not be afraid, yada, yada. Now, if you know anything about Bishop Ignatius, let's just write it in here for 1 second if I can. Bishop Ignatius. This is Ignatius of Antioch, who was chilling around in the world in the 1st century AD. Within the 100 years of Jesus walking around, he is discussing something that is spoken of in Gnosticism Christianity, even though his martyrdom is Coptic Christianity and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And now 2,000 years later, people like Father Seraphim Rose of our day and age in Orthodox Christianity are still quoting something that comes from Gnosticism. Now, I spoke to a person the other day who made a book, or not just a book, but he made certain videos about how there is no Gnosticism in the Gospels. And I would beg to differ on multiple grounds. And this is one such way that I would say Gnosticism is absolutely present in the Gospel and, further on, in the early church history. But I want to direct your attention to this idea of the debt collectors, the tax collectors, and the toll houses of Gnostic and early Christianity, where these demons are, in relation to the Lord's Prayer. Now, all of this stuff that I'm showing you, I literally learned it yesterday just by starting to dig through the Book of Jeu. When I want to look through things, I like to thoroughly dig through them, which is why I'm only on the first couple of pages, the first 50 or so pages of the Book of Jeu. I'm not just going to skim through it. I like to stop at a section and investigate it. And in this case, I investigated these 3 watchers. These toll collectors, these ferrymen, or these demons who are going to get at you when you pass over to the land of the dead. But what I intuitively, or through Spirit, through Holy Spirit even, what have you, what I ended up coming to a conclusion about is that there is a possibility that the Lord's Prayer can be looked at through the lens of Gnosticism if you believe Jesus was actually teaching Gnosticism. And I understand that in modern Christianity, that would be a big no-no. Modern Christians will absolutely have you say that the Catholic Church was correct in that Gnostic texts and codices were all heretical, that we should stay far away from them. Okay, I get it. But if there is a chance that these secret books that keep getting unearthed in this time of great awakening happen to actually be true, and Jesus was speaking of Gnosticism, then theoretically, the Lord's Prayer could be looked at through a Gnostic perspective when it comes to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Now, the Lord's Prayer, let me look it up here for a second. You might have heard that with the Lord's Prayer, the original context of forgive us our trespasses was actually and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And many people have postulated why that is. Let me give you the examples. If you haven't heard, some people believe the translations of Matthew 6's the Lord prayers, when it talks about the sections of debts versus debtors, could be because we are supposed to forgive our debts, given that the people of that time and their Judaistic history and their Talmudic history were used to forgiving the debts of their fellow Jews. Once you get to a point, say, to the degree of like having a debt for 7 years with one of your Jewish neighbors, you could forgive that debt. In fact, nowadays, it's been understood that our current modern day understanding of debts going away after 7 years, like here in Canada, is actually a basis off of this old Jewish tradition. In the Talmudic traditions, you could forgive a Jew for these kind of things, but typically you wouldn't forgive the debts of a Gentile. That's one idea that people have had as to why the Lord's Prayer could be forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Postulation number 2 that people have said as to why this could be in the Lord's Prayer, this debts and debtors section, is the idea that back in that time frame, the people were under Greek and Roman philosophy, so much so that debts would be accumulated and collected by the Caesar of that time. And so again, some people have said perhaps that is why the Lord's Prayer tells us to forgive our debts that we owe to Caesar, so to speak. So that's number 2. Another way of looking at it is through the Gnostic lens. That if Jesus was actually Gnostic and trying to express Gnostic understandings to his followers, then forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors has to do with the debts in the spiritual realm that are trying to be collected by these principalities of the air, these toll collectors at the tax house. So again, forgiving our debts and our debtors, it's the spiritual debt, not the material debt. And then lead us not into temptation of the carnal body, but deliver us from evil. I'm going to leave you off with one more thing. The next book that I learned about was called The Second Apocalypse of James. Now, in the first Apocalypse of James, Jesus tells James, hey, you're going to get martyred. Don't be afraid, okay? And you're going to have to face these 3 watchers. But there is a second Apocalypse of James that was dug up at the same time as the Nag Hammadi was discovered. And these ancient codices, this particular second Apocalypse of James, is the story of the day that he actually passed on and died. So I'm going to leave you off with that, and I'm going to read to you a section of the second Apocalypse of James. The day the stepbrother of Jesus was stoned to death and died. Scrolling down to the bottom of the translation, it says, again, they raised him up since he was alive, and they made him dig a hole. They made James dig a hole. They made him stand in it. And after having covered him up to his abdomen, while he was in this hole in the ground, they stoned him in this manner. And James stretched out his hands, and he said this prayer, not that one which is his custom to say. Instead he said this, my God and my Father, who saved me from this dead hope, who made me alive through a mystery of what he wills, do not let these days of this world be prolonged for me, but the day of your light remains in salvation. Deliver me from this place of sojourn. Do not let your grace be left behind in me, but may your grace become pure. Save me from an evil death. Bring me from a tomb alive, because your grace and love is alive in me to accomplish a work of fullness. Save me from sinful flesh, because I trusted in you with all of my strength, because you are the life of life. Save me from a humiliating enemy. Do not give me into the hand of a judge who is severe with sin. Forgive me all of my debts all the days of my life, because I am alive in you and your grace is alive in me. James just got told that he was going to die and that he was going to face the toll collector who was going to try and take the toll and the debts of his life. And on the day that he died and was stoned to death, the very last thing that he said, if you put yourself in his position, he said a prayer. And why do you think that he said that prayer? He probably sat in that hole in the ground and said, oh shit, this is what Jesus told me about. Here is the day that it's happening. He was right. But because Jesus said that that wasn't the only thing he was going to face, the next step James would have thought about in that hole in the ground was, all right, once I die, I have to go deal with the debts and the toll collectors. And so what does he say in his prayer? Just like in the Lord's Prayer, forgive me all my debts of the days of my life. The second codex that will give you an understanding that the Lord's Prayer could in fact have been written through the lens of Gnosticism. James was never thinking about, forgive me of my debts to Caesar, or he would have said it. He wanted to be saved from the humiliating enemy, the hand of the judge who is severe with sin, and the debts that he is about to deal with when these demon archons are about to judge him as he passes over in the area of the toll tax debt houses, the toll houses of the land of the dead. Hey everyone, I'm Linny D. I make coloring books for kids on Amazon. Click the link in my bio if you're ever interested. If you like these kind of research videos, please let me know, because this is the first batch of videos that I've made. And I'm also a tarot reader. You can always find me at linnyd.com if you're ever interested in a spiritual consultation.